Tim, early birder, and of course Tweet of the Week as well. And right, a few interesting bits and pieces starting off with this unusual visitor, a bird spotted here, which is just a little bit off course by the sound of it.
That's absolutely right. It was called a buff-breasted sandpiper, and it was spotted by a brilliant bloke called Mark Pass. He's just moved to the island and is a very experienced birder, and he spotted it on the driving range at the golf course at Langness, right next to the haunted house at the Maddock Memorial there. Now this little chap is about the size of a thrush, but it's got long legs. It's a wading bird, as its name implies, and it should be in Argentina.
A bit off course then.
Just a tad. But they are regulars to Britain because their migration patterns are a bit erratic. Well, not erratic, they're a bit crazy. They breed in the high Arctic of Canada and, as I discovered years ago, Russia. And they make two flights, one from their breeding sites to the southern parts of the USA. They have a rest there, and then they make the second flight around the Caribbean, around the Horn of Brazil, and they fly into the Pampas of Argentina to spend the winter in Argentina. So they breed in places that people never go to, and they overwinter in places that are rarely visited by bird watchers, the Pampas. What happens is that as they go through the Caribbean, the storms that are generated at this time of the year, September, October, are swirling around, and they pick these birds up and they start swirling around the storm, and the storm tracks across the Atlantic and dumps them in places like the Scillies, the Channel Islands. Ireland get quite a few, and we've had 6 in total ever here in the Isle of Man. 3 of them in the last 6 years.
Oh, wow. So he's not a first then, he has been spotted here before, or at least a bird of the same species has been spotted here before.
Absolutely right. The last one was last year, so we've had 2 in 2 years. It was at the new nature reserve at the Ayers Gravel Pit, the Point of Ayre National Nature Reserve there, and lots of us saw it. But for me it's a very special bird. I used to live in Guernsey. I lived there for a long time. And in the 1980s, we had a run of them. We had, I think it was 13 over a period of about 10 years. Every time it was in September, these birds pitched up. And I got to know them very well because they became almost a regular, and then they stopped. But while they were regulars, I saw them in flight. We even one day, they're so tame, they're like... you've heard of the rarey, rarest animal in the world, and it came extinct because it was so trusting. They're a bit like that. We walked up to one, dropped a net on it, picked it up, ringed it, put it down again, and it just carried on feeding away on crane flies, daddy longlegs and so on. So it's a rather special bird. And I'd seen them in flight, and as they fly, they flash. They've got white underwings, and this catches the light, and as they're flying they flash. It's quite distinctive. In 93 I went on an expedition to eastern Siberia, and we were being flown around in a helicopter, and we persuaded the helicopter pilot one day to go out to Wrangel Island, which is a big island off the coast of Siberia. And we got there, we checked in with the mayor of the local town and started walking up a hill looking for birds. We didn't know what to find there. We were the very first tourists ever to go to Wrangel. The only reason we could go was because of Glasnost and the fact that the USSR had come to pieces. And as we were walking up this hill, I was with some very experienced birders. I wasn't... I'm not now a particularly experienced birder, not like people like Mark Pass or some of the other birders over here. But I saw this bird flying around, flashing white, and I said to the guys, that's a buff-breasted sandpiper. And they looked at me, the dude of the group, and they said, well, how do you know that? And I said, I've seen one or two, I'm sure it is. And we hiked 2 miles to get to where this bird was flying around, and we could see it. And it was part of a lek. It was a male, and the males gather to dance in these very, very remote places, high tundra. And they do this extraordinary dance where they lift their wings up and dance around each other. Meanwhile, in the grass surrounding the area where they're lekking, there are females having a good poke around. Which one's the prettiest? Which one do I fancy? And after a little while, when they get really excited, these males, the females come in and they choose a mate, and off they go into the long grass, as they say. And a few days later, the next brood of buff-breasted sandpipers sees the world. So we got up there and we saw these birds lekking. I mean, it's an extremely uncommon bird, a really difficult bird to find, and there it was doing its wonderful display flights and this lekking dance. So I thought, this is fantastic. The guy said, "Wow, cool, you found us a really good one there." So I was quite chuffed to be a hero for once. And off we went. So I'd seen them in Guernsey. I'd seen them lekking in the northern parts of the tundra. I suppose it might even have been a new record for Russia. These birds normally nest in North America, but this particular lek had drifted across the Bering Straits and into Wrangel Island. So it might have been even a first for Russia. I was leading a tour to Canada a few years later, and I found one on a beach in Canada. So it became a really special bird for me. And last year, when I saw the one in the Ayers, I was absolutely cock-a-hoop to put it onto my sightings for the Isle of Man. And then this year, this one was even better, because it was the one at the Ayers was difficult to see. It was quite a long way away. You needed high-powered telescopes. But this one was just running around on the practice field there. And what a treat that was. We had about, 12, 15 people managed to get there before it was finally spooked by a passing sparrowhawk, and it pushed off somewhere and hasn't been seen since.
So, I suppose the million-dollar question is then, what do you think will happen to it? Will it sort of stop off here, rest, feed, and move on? Will it be able to find its way to its proper grounds?
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. Only a few have ever been ringed, and you need to ring probably a couple of hundred birds before you stand a chance of getting a recovery. If anybody finds a bird with a ring on it, please let us know, because it's a very low rate of recovery. But I like to think they've been seen migrating with dunlin, flocks of dunlin that are overwinter here and further south, and they've been seen migrating with them. And they migrate right up into the high tundra. Well, if you think of your fist as the world, and you look at the first knuckle on your fist, the circumference around your first knuckle is very short, whereas around the middle of the world it's 44,000 miles or whatever it is. So by the time they get up to the very top of the world, it's not far for them to move round and maybe find the area that they were hatched in and rejoin others of their kind. And that's what I like to think has happened to them. I hate to think of them wandering around the world lost forevermore simply because they've been ripped off course by a hurricane. So for me, they go up north and I hope find their pals.
Fingers crossed. Just finally on this one, do you think sort of global warming means that we're more likely to see occurrences like this, with sort of seemingly more storms brewing and things coming across the Atlantic and across Australasia and across, we're seeing flooding, we're seeing more storm, we're seeing more unusual weather activity. Do you think this could lead to more unusual sightings like this?
It is already leading to more unusual sightings. I think this year the bird watchers in Britain have seen more what are known as Yanks than any other year in history, I think. Yanks are American birds that migrate from North America to South America. And like the buff-breasted sandpiper, which is a Yank, they get yanked across the Atlantic and dropped here. So all sorts of American warblers, some of their wading birds have turned up here in increasing numbers, and that's undoubtedly due to the increasing strength of the storms that come across here now.
Fascinating, but not the only fascinating thing in the bird world of late, because kingfisher, you say, a bird I love. I've only seen once or twice over here, more often on where I'm going next week on the canals, but some spottings?
Yes. Yeah, we've been very lucky. We normally get one or two in the Isle of Man for the winter, and I think occasionally they even stop and breed here, but there aren't very many nesting sites for them. They need banks that you can bore holes into, and our rivers don't tend to have the right habitat for nesting, but they do come over here for the winter. And as I say, normally one or two. Peel's a good place and Ramsay's another. However, this year we've had, I think, at least 4 different individuals recorded.
Wow.
Around the island, and one of them has taken up residence in Castletown Harbour and is causing quite a stir. People going past on the buses are now looking down at a row of mostly men, but there are a few women as well with big lenses trying to photograph the kingfisher that's in Castletown Harbour, and it is being sighted daily. It's a regular there. The new flood defence wall is ideal for leaning on and looking over without disturbing the bird. It's almost like a kingfisher bird hide. So these people are trying to and succeeding in getting phenomenal photographs of this thing. But people trying to see it who aren't regular bird watchers are getting a little bit disappointed, because kingfishers are tiny little birds. They're smaller than a starling. And people are expecting, because all these photographs fill the screen with the bird, they're expecting something 3 feet high. They're also expecting to see a blue bird, and if a kingfisher is facing you, it's orange. The whole of the front of it is orange. As it flies away, you get this iridescent blue flash, which is...
I'm familiar with that flash of blue. Yeah.
It's that streak down the back. Yeah. And this one, as it flies from one perch to another, shows the blue flash. But if it's facing people, it's tiny, orange, and they think, where on earth is it? Where is it? Show us. But that's what they've got to look out for. It's best to take binoculars, but people should really go down and have a go at seeing it, because it's regular enough that if you put in a couple of attempts, you might be lucky first time, but you'll certainly see it if you put in a few minutes of observation. Take the binoculars. It likes to perch on the ropes of the boats in the harbour, the mooring ropes, and it also perches on the rungs of the ladders going down the side of the harbour. So the places to look for are the ladders and the ropes, and look out for this little orange blob. Get your binoculars on it, and hey presto, you might see your very first kingfisher.
Wow.
That would be great.
They are beautiful little things. Like I said, the last time I saw them around here, there was one, not recently, but a year or so back, there were a lot of people exactly the same, probably the same folk with the long lenses, just down the road here on Lee Terrace by the river going into the nunnery, and I think there's one down there.
Oh yes, that's Lee Terrace is one of the 4 sites on the island where they're seen regularly, and people get very good pictures there because they're perching on trees and so on, and it's such a natural picture to get a kingfisher perched on a branch. It just looks perfect. Perched on a ladder down the side of the harbour isn't quite as romantic, but still, it's still good to see. So Lee Terrace is one. If you go to the Kipper smoking place in Peel, the little bit of the neb there at the end, you can often see one on the far side of the river that you can't get to, on the concrete sides of the river there. And Ramsay's the 4th place. I'm not quite sure whereabouts at Ramsay, but it'll be somewhere along the river going into Ramsay Harbour.
Lovely. So look out for the kingfisher. Beautiful little bird, I must admit. So exotic looking. However, speaking of exotic, there's also been masses of, I believe, fieldfares.
Fieldfares and redwings. Oh, what a sight yesterday. The calf recorded, I think it was about 5,400 redwings passing through the calf during the day. And I can't remember the number of fieldfare, but it was something in the order of 2,000 fieldfare. And these birds were also seen at the Sound. It was awful weather, and they were sheltering just behind the Sound there in fields. Huge numbers of them, 2,000 in one field behind, just behind the Sound. Other people have seen them at Scarlet, migrating through Scarlet. So it's and Peel Hill was pulling redwing and fieldfare yesterday morning. Huge numbers. People don't realise, but when birds migrate, they have pretty set routes that they take. And normally, if you go to places on those routes, you can see them. So if you go to Peel Hill or down to Craignish, you'll see migrating birds regularly. But what happened yesterday was that there was a massive influx of them into Britain. There was a report from the Sefton coast, which I think is very close to Liverpool. They had 122,600 redwings and 19,000 fieldfare on this one site going past them. They just sat there counting them all day long as these birds flooded through. So it was an amazing phenomenon.
Spectacle, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Almost certainly due to the fact that this very strong storm yesterday had picked them up and whirled them round. They do come down from Scandinavia in large numbers. And you have to remember that the northern parts of Scandinavia are massive. They don't look so big on the map, but they're massive areas, absolutely wild birch forests, lots of rowan trees and so on. And that's where these birds breed in huge numbers. But once they've stripped the berries off the trees in Scandinavia, they're starving. And then in October, November, they migrate down into Britain and even further down into France and so on, looking for food. And then those that survive the winter go back up to Scandinavia to breed. I think there are a few redwing breeding in the north of Scotland, but very, very few. So it was a phenomenal sight for these, what they call it, visual migration watching. They just sit in chairs in places known to be migration routes, and they count stuff going over. So it was a big day yesterday. They had a great time on the calf. Apparently at one time there were 2,000 fieldfares on the field in front of the Calf Bird Observatory, which was quite phenomenal, really exciting.